let's be honest about it. I mean, in politics and democracy, you survive by people knowing who you are, by name recognition. And increasingly, those with name recognition are those sometimes you might describe as on the fringes or making more inflammatory statements or...
But what I wrestle with is that people want that.
Do they?
I don't know.
I think we make a mistake to assume that what people want is what they engage in.
Okay, I wanted to take a minute, just step out of the conversation, because doing an interview, it's actually pretty complicated. It's not about gotcha moments. It's actually about finding a way to talk to someone about vulnerable moments in their life. I'm speaking with the Right Honorable Dame Jacinda Ardern. For Americans, you might remember her as the Prime Minister of New Zealand who gave birth in office, which was a big deal at the time. She was also part of a huge wave of kind of liberal leaders in Western democracies that have all since kind of rolled back into more populist governments. It was really interesting in these moments to hear her make the case, basically, not just for empathy, but kindness in politics. And I feel like this is a time when people think that is being weak. One of the reasons why I don't typically interview politicians, or I don't like to, honestly, is because they can't be vulnerable. It's a lot of talking points. And I understand why they can't be vulnerable, because it can be used against them.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
When you think about vulnerability, you think about being someone, potentially exposing something which may become fodder for their opponents, or that it may betray some kind of weakness. But I think in the process of trying to protect against those things, we might have just put up too much of a wall and lost our sense that you can actually still be a human being in these jobs. In fact, we need you to be a human being in these jobs, and voters will be a little more accepting of that than I think we give them credit for.
I think a lot of politicians in the U.S., they are now frequently being more called out. You're not very authentic. You're not fun to be around. You're not this. It's like people are more willing to say that this is a requirement also of being a politician, is coming across like a person.
If we want good people to run for public office, I think we have to show that you can be human.
Yeah.
Because otherwise people will think, I'll make mistakes, I won't get everything right, and there's no space for that in politics.
And you get picked apart. I feel like the one thing you can't be in public office, or even in public, is vulnerable, admitting to failings. Like apologies are even sort of rare now.
Yeah, I understand that, we have a perspective now, certainly as politicians, where we think that there's some areas that are no-goes. That if you change, for instance, a policy decision, that will be framed. If you go out and say, look, we made this decision initially, we've seen the impact it's had, or we've heard the public on it, we are reversing that decision. Now, I think two things happen with that. It will be framed as a flip-flop, a reversal, a back down, but it's also listening. It's humility. It's contrition. It's, in some ways, you could call it democracy. And so I think we should actually be willing, despite the way these things can be reframed, be willing to encourage that, because otherwise no politician can ever change their mind. And sometimes they should.
Yeah.
Sometimes they should.
Okay, here's where I want to hit pause. This is a moment where I wanted to ask her a tougher question. For someone like me, reading her book, watching her documentary, I have this feeling like I'm worried about her, right? Not just her safety, but I feel like, are you really the right creature for this? Are you suited to this world? So I got into that with her just a little bit more. I think that what happens when I tell women I'm going to do this interview is they start projecting and thinking about how they think they should be in their leadership jobs.
Yeah.
And then they put it onto you. Then it becomes the critique to you. So help me. It's not a real question. It's just like, what is that feeling we have where we are afraid to be the things we are?
So I think that some of that is just an expectation of what leadership is meant to look like in certain circumstances. And we build that over years. We build that over observation. We build it over, watching people in circumstance that we're used to seeing broadcast out into the world. And if you're only used to seeing one way of being, particularly in political leadership, then you expect that. So if you're used to seeing kind of a bold, brassy, defiant, I'd say sometimes not just confident, overly confident, a bit of ego in there, then if we see someone who is not doing that, then we think that person will not survive.
Yeah. And therefore can't represent you.
And therefore isn't best placed possibly to represent you. But I just really want to challenge whether or not that is a fair representation of where people are at with political leadership.
One of the things you talk about very early in the film is having imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I was 14 years old when someone first used the term imposter syndrome.
And it was just like something clicked. Suddenly I had words to describe how I'd felt for every speech competition I did, or any challenge where I just had a bit of a seed of doubt and a fear that something might expose that I shouldn't be there.
What does it mean to you? And what did it mean to you then? Because I'm sure things might have changed a little bit now.
Or maybe not. Imposter syndrome, I think it's a spectrum, and it's ultimately a way to describe a confidence gap. And that can manifest either consistently. You consistently question whether you should be in the role you're in, or have the tasks that you have and whether you're up to it, or it may just be at a specific moment in time when someone asks you to take on the next step or the next challenge.
Here she comes now. She could not look happier.
I want to start by saying that it is an absolute honour and a privilege. You worry about being exposed, you worry about failure. I think probably what I've learned over time is two things. One, that it doesn't go away. And that in the past, I would have thought then was a failure of sorts, that it should be something to be overcome. But over time, I've realized that all of the traits that come with having that confidence gap can actually be beneficial, because what do we do to overcome a confidence gap? We prepare, we seek advice, we talk to experts, and actually that can lend itself to being more decisive in your decision making, having more clarity when it comes to the moment of taking on a role, and having more humility. So over time, I've come to learn that it's actually brought me traits that I found incredibly useful in my leadership.
One of the weird things about it for you, you have your imposter syndrome, you have your confidence gap, and then someone comes along and is like, you should.
When I stood down there for that press conference, I waited for someone to just stand up and say that outright. Why you? And they did.
I'm happy to take questions. I'm sure there are many.
Do you think you're up to the job of being Prime Minister, which you could be in a couple of months' time?
Yes, I am, Barry, and my team would not have selected me if they didn't believe that also.
So you're like, how can I be in imposter syndrome if you're actively telling me maybe I shouldn't be doing this job?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think also it comes from absolutely nowhere. I think over time there are things that may lead you to question yourself. Interestingly, though, we're always our own worst critic. There were times that I found that when others would critique me, that actually I found myself being a bit more defensive towards that, a bit more inclined to defend my own position. And so it is possible to hold that confidence gap and yet also hold your ground. And I think people find it difficult to reconcile those two things, but that's certainly my experience.
You're saying that sometimes people would come at you and you would find yourself saying, actually, no, I am competent to do this. Can you recall a time when you felt like maybe they're right?
Those times where I would feel that I'd let a criticism in, sometimes I actually thought, no, I should hear that. If someone says you're not doing enough on inequality, and they're a representative of communities that are affected by your policies, listen.
Yeah.
And so it's not the case we should filter out everything. So I always looked for intent. Where is that person coming from? Is that criticism fair? Do I need to hear it? Or is this just politics?
So One of the things that's going to be interesting about this interview is I don't want to be the person who asks you about your family, okay, and having a baby in office. However,
Oh, you know what? I was only the second woman in the world. You know, I feel no, I harbor no grudge over the fact that I talk about these things. I think it comes naturally with there being so few. I'm the only living leader to have had a baby in office.
looking back, I sort of forgot how it all played out. Even just announcing the pregnancy in front of your home.
Well, this is normal. Welcome, everyone, for a somewhat unusual announcement. Clark and I are really excited to share. In June, we're looking forward to welcoming our first child.
How do you consider getting married?
Clark?
Yeah.
Steps in front of your home. I was
Yes.
like, you need a fence. Why is the press so close to your front door?
Oh, it's in part. We had a fence, but a very small front
Yeah,
yard.
very
And so
clear.
they were all really wedged in there. So that is fair.
And right away, it was like, are you getting married? Are
Yeah.
you? It was like being at Thanksgiving with a nosy aunt.
Yeah, yeah.
Only the nosy aunts were like the national media
Yeah, yeah.
asking these questions that felt very personal. And how was it for you and your partner? Like you turned back in the house, and was it awkward, or were you still sort of joyful?
Yeah, I mean, I remember feeling joyful, but I also remember holding our breath slightly because, you know, I write about this. I lost my instincts through that period. I just did not know what the response would be. And it's not like I could canvass around and ask people because it was a secret. So I just had to literally wait and see. And we were overwhelmed in the end by the warmth and the positivity. Yeah.
Once you give birth, now you're doing the job and also doing the part of newborn and baby.
She's 2 weeks old today. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, just how am I going to juggle all of these things while still serving at work? A couple of times I've tried to read papers while I've been breastfeeding, and it's not that easy.
I remember with those days, you're trying to like pump breast milk in a closet,
Yes.
and the doctor's like, look at a picture of your baby on the phone. And I'm like, this is not working.
Yes.
This is just straight up. Like, you don't want anyone to think you can't do it.
That's right.
But the worst part is you're doubting yourself about whether
Yes.
you can.
Yes.
I don't want to spend this whole interview projecting, which is clearly what I'm doing. But I guess I'm wondering, what were the doubts?
Yeah.
And what were the complications about being able to ask for help?
Yeah. My first problem was I had this unrealistic expectation of how it was meant to be. And, because I had a bit of a plan and I really needed that plan to work, that when it wasn't working, I felt like things, how was I going to hold it all together? And that plan simply was I wanted to be a breastfeeding mother. I felt like that was what I was meant to do. And when that wasn't working out, it added this extra layer of logistics to everything that became really difficult to manage. But actually, on reflection, no one else was putting that pressure on me. No one else was saying, this is absolutely the way that you have to do it. It was me.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started letting go of some of that expectation, it got easier. And what I didn't expect was actually how much easier it would be for my partner. So actually, in the end, it was our daughter who decided. She was like, nope, 4 months in, this isn't working for me anymore.
Yeah.
And
Were you sad? I was sad. Mine was like underweight, and it felt like I felt like a failure. I was just like, I'm struggling at work, meaning I don't feel like I'm holding myself to my own standard at work. Everyone at work thinks you're doing fine.
Yeah.
But you're like, I'm not keeping up the way I want. I'm not ahead of the game I want. And now this baby has looked me dead in the face and said,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're not doing this right either.
Yes.
And I'd like a bottle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was sad.
Yeah. I was sad. And I was sad in part because, I thought if I'd been able to dedicate more time to it, maybe I
If I
could have
ate more
got away.
biscuits.
But I think the thing that I felt the saddest about was I no longer had any reason to have her with me. When you're breastfeeding, it was a reason I could have her around.
When you were watching the film and looking back on that period, what did you think?
I remember how it felt. I remember how hard it felt. But I also just wish that I could have told myself that actually it'll be easier from here. You know, it'll be okay. And this is not your first test as a mother, and you haven't failed it. There'll be there's a lot more tests to come. But yeah, you haven't failed, or that, because that's how sometimes it can feel. So I wish that I could just tell it to myself, but with hindsight, I see it.
Yeah, that's a nice feeling.
Mm.
I think it's an interesting aspect of your story in that you were doing this project where someone was calling you and interviewing you in real time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
also you have your partner filming you.
Yes.
So there was a lot of basically material. Like there was a lot for you to look back on
Yeah.
and recontextualize your own story.
Yeah, and I'm not very good at doing that in real time. For
It's
instance,
pretty clear from the film.
yeah.
Multiple occasions you were giving your partner a look of death
Yeah.
that all women recognize.
Yeah.
I'm not even 40. You're not going to force me to process this morning. I don't have time.
Well, I'm conflicted because as your partner, I want to support you, but as someone that's trying to film this, it'd be nice to know what's going through your head, I guess.
I'm not doing this right now.
And I was like, she doesn't want to be talking about this right now.
No, I think it's because self-preservation and also just always having your eye on the next thing that needs to be done. And so I had that practice while in office. And so I think that was part of the reason that I would get frustrated at being stopped. I just needed to keep that forward momentum. And I was so focused on the job I had.
I knew coming into the interview that there were certain things I wanted to ask about that in a way were a reflection of American politics. But there was a reason for that. Her career has straight parallels. She has dealt with all the questions we still struggle with, whether that be gun control policy or climate policy, then later COVID lockdown policy. She's done it all on a small scale, and she's done it really differently. And in a way, we want to figure out just, not that one way is better or worse, but something different. Because I think at times it feels politically in the US like we're kind of stalled out. One of the things I was struck by is how much of what I considered an American-style culture war had come to New Zealand after the pandemic, and or through concerns about vaccine mandates and things like that.
They're waving American flags and Canadian flags, and you can't help feeling that they've fallen into someone else's wormhole and it's not ours.
And is that how you saw it as well? Was it a little bit of like, wait, what's going on here? Is this how we usually do business, or is this the internet bringing another kind of politics to us?
Gallows on the forecourt, ropes hanging down there. They had the names of politicians, family members. It was grim.
Yeah, and I think here I would say I think we're witnessing a globalization of political culture. So I think what we see in New Zealand is to a smaller degree to what we're seeing elsewhere, but it's present nonetheless. And we're not alone in that. And so that actually means, that we need to think about what is part of now the universal, experience for Western liberal democracies right now that we need to be thoughtful about. I think we've taken for granted that it's one of the really important principles of a strong, healthy democracy is our ability to debate and build consensus. And for that, you need to have some common ground. You need to really agree on what you're debating in the first place, what's fact, what's fiction. Have an agreed set of values about the way that you're going to engage in debate. And some of that has been eroded. Some of that has been challenged. And no one, I can't say that there's any country that's being sheltered from that at the moment.
Over time, so many Western democracies have turned to populism, to turn to more kind of a conservative politics. And that is not just the US, that's in Europe as well.
This trend of right-wing populism.
Is that a rejection of the kind of politics you were trying to practice?
I think that might be I think there might be more to it than that. You know, and here I
Have you been wrestling with that? Because I can imagine you're at home reading these news articles as well about various elections, and even in New Zealand where people have rolled back a lot of policies that you had put in place.
And, you know, and yet when you look globally, you see a dissatisfaction regardless of who happens to be in power at present. And so I think it's really important. I do think about this a lot because, you know, I think about all of the big challenges that we have to take on and what's required for us to be able to end the horrific, you know, conflicts we see in the world, and to address climate change, and to deal with the financial insecurity people feel. And so I think we do need to dig a little deeper. And there is some research now that's telling us some really interesting things about where the public are at. Edelman had this longitudinal survey, so it tells us where people are over time, and we saw massive dips in people's trust and confidence in political institutions during the global financial crisis.
So going back to 2008.
Yep. And then track forward, we see again rises over time, but then dips again. And right now, we have more than 60% of people who feel grievance. So not just a trust issue, but grievance towards political institutions because they feel like they are worse off than they have been. They don't feel like predominantly that their children will be better off. So that tells us two things. In the here and now, they're struggling and their hope for the future is eroding. And then you drop down one layer again and you get a portion of people who, as a result of that, feel that hostile acts are justified in that environment. And that includes spreading of disinformation or even at the extreme end, acts of violence.
Breaking this hour, country in shock.
One of the most difficult things I want to ask you about ties New Zealand together with the US.
It was a mass shooting, leaving at least 49 people dead.
Which is the Christchurch massacre, which happened while you were in office, where you had an Australian man coming to New Zealand, committing an act of, I think, what is now termed as sort of accelerationist terrorism, like trying to send a message on an issue that whatever you're trying to do, and thinking that that act of violence will draw more violence. And in that case, he attacked a mosque and killed, I think, upwards of 51 people. Since that time, his manifesto has kind of lived on in the internet. Can I sort of process this with me? Like, for you, as someone who even tried to prevent the manifesto, right, from spreading, that's not how it worked out.
The challenge is, how do you stop people being radicalized in the first place?
Yeah.
And your response to a violent extremist event is part of that. For instance, when someone, regardless, you know, we know from experts in the field that when someone engages in violent extremism, regardless of their ideological motivation, they seek generally three things. They are seeking revenge of some kind, they are seeking notoriety, and they are seeking a reaction. You know, after the act, the first is done, but you do have some control over the next two. And when I think about our response in Christchurch, we denied him his infamy. And the response that New Zealand had to reject his attempt to try and create retaliatory events, we denied him the reaction he wanted.
It feels like the longest week of my life, if I'm honest.
Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence. Many of those who will have been directly affected by this shooting may be migrants to New Zealand. They may even be refugees here. They have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is their home. They are us.
You said something about the victims. You said they are us.
Yeah.
And rewatching that, I was really struck because I thought about, in the US right now, we're facing a rising tide of political violence.
There's been a shooting. We heard shots.
Okay, we've had a public assassination now of an activist. And everybody's first response when there is a shooting is to find out the race, nationality, and political affiliation of the shooter, because that somehow will dictate how to respond and whether or not you should feel empathy towards the victims almost. And because you're in this line of work, I wanted to ask you about that. How could leaders respond in a different way?
Well, I can only speak to our experience, and if, as I would hope we would all wish to do, if we want to send a message that political violence and the violent extremist actions will never be accepted, are wrong, should be denounced, then it's as simple as that. The utter rejection, regardless of perpetrator, regardless of victim, that political violence is never acceptable. And sending that clear message consistently would actually, from what I've observed or seen, be in line with what the general public of the US feel.
I don't feel like that's what I see in the politics. Not that they don't reject political violence. I think everyone pays lip service to that. But I had a hard time picturing an American politician getting up and doing what you did and saying, if you did this, if you were a part of this, you are not a part of us and our society, right? To say to the people out there, and this matters now because you have shooters who look back at Christchurch, who swap notes, right? And share what they're going to do. There's a community of people who say, my grievance can turn into something else. It can turn into a point of impact or significance for me on the world stage.
When you think about, in our example, one of the motivations, so there was a few motivations of the individual who engaged in that horrific act. I mean, unimaginable. He chose Friday prayers to maximize the number of lives that he took. And one of the things he wanted to do was to try and incite violence from within the Muslim community in response. And the Muslim community denied him that. They rejected his act of hate. And, I will forever be so humbled by their reaction where they opened the doors of their mosques and welcomed New Zealand to come in and grieve with them. And so if we think again about those three things that people seek, revenge, notoriety, and reaction, our responses can dictate whether or not someone succeeds. So it's up to us whether or not we wish to deny them their goal. And it does, it is, again, these aren't my crises to respond to, and it's not my nation that's responding. All I know is that when New Zealand and our Muslim community responded in that way, our country was safer for it.
What's it been like when you've lived in the States and witnessed one of these national moments?
It does bring back a lot of memories of what it is to govern through those times. But I think in crisis, one of the things that I certainly learned was the importance of proximity. Proximity to the people most directly affected, because that's when you really hear what they need from you in that time as a leader.
Yeah, because we're in a time where there could be a shooting, there could be an incident, and a leader might not visit the family or visit the victims or visit the community, right? Or they might do one and not the other, and people notice that. It's a big country.
Yeah.
But I'm parsing it because I'm trying to think again of what is effective response, effective meaning, what is the response that would deter and disincentivize it from happening again?
Leaders and researchers in this field will say, regardless of whether it's religion or politics that prompts you towards extreme views, the common theme with all violent extremists or terrorists is binary thinking. The point where you are able to say, I'm right and you are absolutely wrong, I am good and you are evil, because that's when you allow yourself to dehumanize others. And that's the pathway to those violent extremist acts. So yes, let's take out whatever the motivation is and just look at some of those precursors and what takes people to those places.
We're in a moment where certainly on the left in the US, it's people need to fight fire with fire. that they need to be as aggressive, as direct, as in some cases mean-spirited as the politics they feel they are facing. And it feels like something I want to bring to you because you're basically advocating not to do that. Do you?
I am. And look, that's not.
I mean, do you see that? Do you hear that
I hear it,
conversation? Because you were at
absolutely.
Harvard for a while, so your
Absolutely.
students are hearing this.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that. And look, I'm not one to lecture anyone else because politics is hard. It is difficult, and people are in environments that are not the one that I'm familiar with. And so, each person will make the choices that are for them to make. From my perspective, we should be the politics we want to see in the world. And so if we actually believe in raising the standard, then raise the standard. Set your bar where you believe it needs to be and maintain that bar. I personally have always had a view that in doing so, you're demonstrating to people that actually you are focused on their issues. The moment it looks like you're just into a slinging match with your opponent, people don't believe you're focused on them anymore, then you're in the beltway. But I think the second issue for me is, and I know some people will probably express this as naivety, but why is it that the things that we try and teach our kids to model in the world, we then completely abandon in our expectation of politics? We expect courtesy, generosity, curiosity, bravery, and kindness. I know I value that with our children. Why in political leadership do we then suddenly think that that's weakness? And yet we invest so much time teaching it to the next generation. So that's another reason I push back on these old notions of what leadership should be.
Do you hear young people ask you questions about this?
Yeah. And the thing that stands out to me the most is they are not asking about a type of model they should adopt. They're asking how to be themselves. How do I hold on to these values that I already believe in and that I actually think are part of my personality when it feels like in order to succeed, I need to abandon them? So I don't think this is about teaching people new qualities. It's assuring them they can hang on to the ones they have.
Well, the entire system disincentivizes a person to do that.
It does. Let's be honest about it. I mean, in politics and democracy, you survive by people knowing who you are, by name recognition. And increasingly, those with name recognition are those sometimes you might describe as on the fringes or making more inflammatory statements or, gaining the attention of the public for reasons that, may not advance people's belief in politics.
But what I wrestle with is that people want that.
Do they?
I don't know. Like as a journalist, in a way, you go through a similar thing.
Yeah,
you want
I
to bring a
understand.
certain kind of news and a certain kind of tone. That's not what is rewarded, right? What's rewarded is the version of it that is very mocking and mean-spirited. And that's the thing people click on.
I think we make a mistake to assume that what people want is what they engage in. I think that we engage, it's human instinct. We engage in those things that cause a human emotion, a reaction, that cause rage. And so I think that is one of the issues we have. Those things that we click on are the things that then more will be written about, we will continue to read about, and yet what we miss are those politicians who are out there grafting away, trying to solve problems, trying to build consensus. We don't spotlight that anymore. And yet I do still believe instinctively that's what people are looking for. I run a fellowship now on empathetic leadership. I work with politicians who every day are leading with empathy, I think doing an excellent job, who deserve to be spotlighted, because I still genuinely believe that people want politicians who are there for them, not for the clicks.
What do you have to teach in something like that?
In some cases, I wouldn't necessarily even describe it as teaching, but again,
is it just a safe space to be empathetic, basically?
A reaffirmation that actually the way you instinctively want to do politics, stick with it. It's creating a network of people to support one another. It's a pretty difficult environment. I think those networks really help. sharing case studies of where these approaches have made a difference, not just in delivery, but even on foreign policy and national security. And just, reassuring people, stick with your instincts. We need more of that.
This may feel like a hard turn, but it was necessary. It's one thing to talk about empathetic leadership kind of in the abstract at some leafy university. It's another thing to send out another generation out into the world to be leaders when there are big, fundamental questions going on, like how do you talk about the war in Gaza? These are all really tough questions for our time, and especially in the US, and so I had to ask her about it. We're in this moment where the war in Gaza, I think, is challenging people's ability to talk about things with empathy. And often, even what I hear in the debate is, well, why are you empathetic to that and not this other thing? Bring them home now! Right? There's kind of a comparison of like, which is the worst thing to be upset about and therefore to act. What are you thinking in this moment? To you, like what are you thinking as people are having this debate over what the UN is calling a genocide, what lots of international leaders are concerned about, but that obviously in Israel is felt as an existential threat?
Even I remember when I was first asked about this only months after October 7, and where my mind immediately went to was the importance of remembering our shared humanity. And that can seem so simplistic, and yet ultimately that's what we need to call upon in our leaders and our decision makers, is not allowing ourselves to fall into this binary thinking that dehumanizes the individuals who are so deeply and tragically affected. When you remind yourself of the humanity, the people who are dying every day, the children who are dying every day at the hands of choices that are sitting amongst very, very few, then it becomes simple. The war must end. The war must end.
It doesn't feel simple.
Well, I think to people on the outside who are feeling disenfranchised by politics, who think we've lost sight of humanity, I think perhaps it does feel simple to them. You stand by while this continues, then where's the humanity?
As I said, I had to ask because there's a world of people you want to go out and lead, and they'll have to lead those moments, right? They'll have to be the ones to make those choices. And again, like what do you think is going to equip them for this, right?
Yeah.
This kind of scale. That's what being a leader is about.
And what I would say is that, there's no thing that can prepare you for leadership in a way, because, there's any number of challenges that can come your way, that there won't be any playbook for. There won't be a prior leader who will have had to deal with exactly the same thing. So there's an enormous number of challenges that you just have to deal with in the moment that you have them. But if you bring with you a really strong set of values, that is going to get you halfway there if you hold on to them.
What are you way to resign?
Which is going to come as a shock to just about everyone.
I don't know, I suppose so. There was no single moment. There was just this overwhelming feeling that that if something else happened, something else that was big or difficult, that I wouldn't have enough in the tank to do a good job.
When you first resigned, what was the feeling that you had?
Certainly not that something was over.
But was it relief? Was it freedom?
Yeah,
Was
I'd firstly
exhaustion?
I'd frame myself as being more mid-career rather than sunset. But yeah, to a certain extent, there was there's no question that when you carry the responsibility of leadership and all of the unknowns that come with it, that at any given day you could wake up and a new crisis could arrive, that the moment you don't have that mantle of responsibility, that is very freeing, and you do feel that automatically lift. But I think if you're someone that just wants to be useful in the world, and, I'm pretty earnest, so I guess, I'm one of those people, then that sense that you have to keep going and find the next thing, that doesn't leave you. And so, yes, I closed a chapter, but I'm certainly constantly looking for the
Yeah.
next one.
And you're young. I mean, as people have talked about tremendously a lot. And so you had more time. I just didn't know if you wanted to spend that time with family. I know that my thing is more. Like there isn't a brass ring that I don't want to reach for
Yeah.
and to find the next one. And I don't know what drives me in that way, but I wanted to ask if you're similar. You want to be of service, but you kind of have a compulsion towards.
Yes. Yeah, that's a fair description. But I don't see these things as mutually exclusive, and that was one thing that I was really careful about when I left office. You often notice that when leaders stand down or people in significant roles stand down, they'll often use that reference, I'm going to spend more time with my family.
Which we all then investigate because we don't believe it.
Well, there's that.
Yeah.
But also the flip side of that is to say I couldn't do that before. That I wasn't living up to my own expectations of my family, of the role I have for myself and my family. And I didn't want to send that message. I didn't want to say, you cannot be a mother and a leader. And so while I did reference some of the things I looked forward to doing with my family, I was very careful not to use that turn of phrase.
Yeah.
Because that's not the message I want to share. And I did not leave because I did not feel I could be a mother and a leader. I left because I didn't feel like I could be a good leader anymore. Full stop. There were lots of traits that I valued, and I could feel some of them ebbing away or just being chipped at. And I don't think that's unique to me. I think that's just natural over time. I've been in politics 15 years. I've been Prime Minister 5, and through the kind of crises, a domestic terror attack, a volcanic eruption, a pandemic, the kind of crises that made 5 years feel like 10, and probably for the public too. I was really in the public eye a lot, particularly through the pandemic. And so I felt my curiosity waning a bit. I felt my defensiveness increasing. And I also felt the reserves that you need when you're in a role like that were decreasing. And so if a crisis happened upon us again, I didn't feel like I could do the job as well as I'd like.
In responding with empathy or in just physically? Like, what was it you felt like you wouldn't be able to bring to the next crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that those things that I valued the most, an empathetic response, I would still be driven by all of those things. But, you have to be on and available and really in the job. Very little respite when crisis occurs. And I felt like just my ability to do that well was declining.
What do you know now that you wish you knew when you look back at the person in the dock?
I think actually probably just keeping this perspective that you'll get the country through. Because there's some moments where you just the unknowns you're dealing with are so difficult, and so yeah, it's that in the end it'll be okay.
Okay, last question. It says, this is not a question to sound fawning or fangirl. Why are you normal? Like, we have met at least once before, and I remember thinking like, yeah, I could have a drink with this person, which I never in my life thought about a politician. And do you get that a lot where people are like, why can I talk to you?
there are a lot of normal people in politics. There's just not always the incentives or even the belief that you can be yourself. You know, it's a pretty difficult environment. It's a pretty cutthroat environment. And for lots of reasons, I think, you know, people
Our
don't always
perception is
feel.
like power corrupts. You know what I mean? And that's the story Hollywood tells of like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or whatever, that fundamentally you're going to go to a place of power, that power will change you, and that's going to be the story. And I feel like you're trying to go to a completely counter narrative.
And yet, having, you know, been in politics for a long time, you know, I absolutely see that politics has a big branding problem. And yet, my experience, certainly in the New Zealand environment, was that the majority of people that I worked with were there because they genuinely believed they could make a positive difference for the place they loved. And we didn't always agree on what that difference would be. And not everyone was like that. But most people I worked with were. So, you know, I think the thing that I feel really strongly about now is just not losing people's expectations of politics and politicians, that they deserve better and they should seek better. And for those who are in politics to say, actually, all those traits that maybe you believe there was no place for them, there is.
Who in this room has ever doubted what they are capable of doing? I did most days. So I want you now to remember, when you have that seed of doubt about whether you could be doing something that you're already doing, or whether or not you might take up something that someone's told you should have a go at, I want you to remember me. Because unless I had pushed down all of that self-doubt and just said yes from time to time, I would never have been Prime Minister. Who knows what you are capable of? But one of the biggest barriers I know for our young people in New Zealand, because I see it all the time, is ourselves. So please, just remember me. Maybe one of you will end up being Prime Minister too, if you want.
Well, Dame Jacinda Ardern, thank you so much for talking with me. I really appreciate the time you've taken out to do this.
Thank you. Really enjoyed our chat.
Hey. Yeah.
We're good.